Hey everybody, thanks for watching Source Talk Mopars. I have been excited for this one. Today, bringing Operation Venomous Fish into the 21st century by installing QA1 front coilover conversion kit. What you see here is actually the QA1 front coilover suspension for your Mopar. Now obviously this is for an A body, and this actually was purchased right before QA1 bought it, so this is actually from Gerst himself. He was the initial designer of the system. Obviously you got the front tubular K-member, got the Wilwood brakes over here with the two spindles, and then in here we've got our coilovers. These are the springs, a bunch of other components which we'll dig into in a second, and of course the rack and pinion. Now obviously the reason why I went with this is because I wanted a lot more room in the engine bay, get rid of those torsion bars. I wanted adjustable front coilover suspension so I could tune it for the track, and today we're going to put this in, so it should be pretty straightforward. I'm running out of daylight today, so it's probably going to be a 2-day video, but it is what it is. Let's get going.
Now, if you're already subbed to the channel, you'll remember when we did a complete overhaul on the suspension for the 68 Dart. If you want some guidance on how to remove the stock stuff, you can watch that video. I'll tag it to the end of this one. But once you get the suspension completely off your car, you're going to need to locate these two brackets and cut them off or drill out the spot welds.
All right, after you got the frame rail prepped and ready for the new K-member, you're going to need to make sure you locate and clean some of your existing hardware. So what I'm really talking about is I'm talking about the camber bolts, unless you want to purchase some new ones. Most just reuse them like myself. Clean all the threads, all those special washers, that stuff. You're also going to reuse your K-member bolts. So those big giant guys, clean the threads, make sure they're clean to go, and then you can go ahead and use them. Now, when the K-member gets in, like you see here, now it's time to get started on the rest of the assembly. And before you really do that, you've got to put together your upper and lower control arms. So you're going to have to dig through your parts and locate these items. All right, right here. So we've got our lower control arm. With it, we've got both kits for the ends. If you look at this right here, it's kind of wrapped in plastic, but this is going to be that bar end. Comes with the 2 bushings, of course, in the sleeve. You should have 2 of those. In your kit, you're actually going to have 4, but obviously you'll need 2 for this side. You're also going to have a lower ball joint. It's a thread type, so not too difficult to put in. You don't have to press it in. You can see the threads in here. Just make sure they're clean. On the upper control arm side, obviously we have our upper control arm. Now, you're going to want to make sure you get the right one because these are side specific. So way you can do that is if you take your upper control arm, hold it next to the frame, you want the higher end, which is this one, to go towards the front of the car, as you can see here. So this one is obviously the passenger. I used the other one already on the driver's side. So you've got your upper control arm itself. You've got a 1-inch extension ball joint. Again, it's a thread type, just like the bottom, so pretty easy to install. You got your boots, of course, and then you got your 2 ends for your upper control arm, as well as the locking nut. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with the upper control arm, and then I'll move on to the lower. All right, now that I've got the upper and lower assembled, it's time to put them on the car. Some cars are gonna have this problem, others not, but this piece of metal right here is actually in the way. So I gotta come through and I gotta cut this out because the control arm will hit this corner. All right, now I'm sure you could have probably imagined, but this is a pain in the And it's really just the alignment aspect, right? All these brand new parts trying to fit in this old cheap metal. Let me show you some of the areas I had some problems with, what I had to do to get around it, and what you might have to do. Now on the upper control arms, you'll see here that there's 2 spacers used. This is a pretty narrow pivot arm here. And I've got my camber bolts coming from the outside. Something I didn't mention already is I don't have an inner fender. You most likely will if you're doing the swap, and so your camber bolts are going to have to go from the inside pushing out. That make it a little more difficult to get these in. The first one's not hard, it's usually the second one because now your play is gone, which that's what I had an issue with. I had to bend this tab out a little bit so that I could get these 2 pieces in, and then when I tightened it, it pinched it back together in a normal spot. You can see there's not a whole lot of material that these spacers rest on here, or I guess are pinched on against. So if this is a problem in the future, I'll make sure to post a video about it. I'd most likely just shave these down and add some big washers on the end. But got it in, so now I can at least move on to the next step. Lower one's not too hard. It's really just the upper one that's kind of a pain. All right, so at this point, the instructions actually say to go ahead and install that spindle. However, I would highly advise you at least get the sway bar into position before you lock up that lower control arm. As soon as you connect that spindle, you have no more flexibility in the control arm, and now the sway bar is really difficult to get in. Not impossible, but save yourself the effort. Okay, so I finally got the spindle bolted in here, both the upper and lower ball joints. I did have to add 2 extra washers on here so that I'd actually get the proper torque in here. This is actually only torqued to 55 foot-pounds, thanks to this bad boy here. The lower and upper, actually, only 55. I know the old school stuff's like 100. You don't have to worry about that, just 55 foot-pounds. Now that I've got this assembled, it's time for the coilover. But before I can put it in, I got to build it.
Now the coilover is pretty straightforward. As soon as you get everything out of the boxes, you're going to go ahead and first install that locking nut. After the locking nut, you're going to put the bottom adjuster plate, followed by a washer, and of course the spring itself. After the spring, you put that top plate on there, compress it, and the coilover has been assembled. Now you'll have a small little parts kit in the box. You got to whip that out. You'll have a bunch of lock ring washers, a stud. You're going to take that, and it's pretty obvious where it goes. The instructions are pretty good with it. But both the top and the bottom mounting points are going to have the snap rings on either side of that little flexible joint. So make sure you get those seated properly before you go to install it, and you won't have any problems.
All right, now to visualize how this coilover is going to actually mount to that bottom plate, this is the pin that you get, and so this is going to slide in the bottom hole of the coilover. It's got a snap ring here. Once I put it on, I'll put the second snap ring so it doesn't move. And then this, with the coilover, is going to sit right in here, just like that. And so that'll be the mounting point. 2 bolts go straight through. It gives you a little bit of movement there to align it. So that would be the bottom mount, of course, and then the top mount is pretty self-explanatory. Now, one thing I thought was really interesting is the bolts they give you for the top mount here for your coilover is this guy. And you'll see it's got obviously a lot of thread here, half of it's thread, and then you get a long or short shoulder here. But this is how it's supposed to go in. So just like this, get rid of the washer and you're locked on the back side, it's fine. But it's got a lot of thread that's going to sit on that sleeve of the coilover. I would have expected a longer shoulder and maybe some fine thread here. But nope, this is what you get. So this is what I'm going to install. If I get issues with the coilover getting damaged from the threads, which I don't think is going to happen since half the shoulder will be on it, then I'll end up swapping this bolt out anyways. Now, this is truly easy. I just really bolted it in. You just got the 2 large bolts here, one on the back side of that. But they don't really talk in the instructions about how to really put that on. So I just wanted to show you. Obviously, you got your giant 5/8 bolt here, which is like 4.5 inches long. Bolt, washer, silver guy here. Bushing comes on the rack and pinion already. Then you've got this big puck spacer, 3/4 inch spacer, washer, lock nut. That replicate on the other side, it's bolted in. Now I'm gonna go ahead and put the tie rods in, my adjuster sleeve, and just like everything, gonna give it a bunch of anti-seize. All right, so the tie rod is in. You can see how I configured it here. I've got a shim on the bottom there. It's connected to the bolt. Obviously the tie rod in. I got a 1-inch spacer and then basically a big washer, lock nut, good to go. I can adjust this as needed. So if I end up having bumps here or anything like that, I can add additional spacers in there. I've got a bunch of spares in the kit. Just have to see how it works on the road. But for now, that's a good starting point. I also went ahead and installed the sway bar. And in the instructions, you do it at this point. However, knowing what I know now, I would have gotten that sway bar in a position way earlier in the process. In fact, I would have put it in position before I connected the upper and lower control arms to the spindle. Just because the way the instructions tell you to do it at this stage, at least, when you've already got the coilover in, you've already got the spindle connected, it leaves very little room to actually get that sway bar in there. Can't tell you how many F-bombs I said at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to get that thing to fit, and then miraculously I just got it one time. So do it a little bit earlier. It's going to save you. If you don't, just expect to fight it a little bit. All right, now that the suspension is essentially complete to where I can at least take it with this car, now it's time to go ahead and install the brakes. So depending on what you order, you could either be installing a stock style setup meant for like a 14-inch wheel, you know, if you're doing something a little more original on the outside at least, all the way up to like a 14-inch rotor, 6-piston Willwood. So naturally, your boy went with a 6-piston, and it's a lot of work. Essentially, you're starting with a box of parts, as you can see here, and turning it into this bad boy. So obviously, lots of fasteners. This took me quite a bit, took about 2 hours, but once this bad boy's on, it's gonna be well worth it. And by the power of YouTube, here's the assembly in about 30 seconds. All right, and as you can see, this is it fully assembled. Now, in order to torque these studs, you saw me put it into that wheel. That way it just kind of held the hub sturdy so that I could actually get the proper torque on it. These were 77 foot-pounds. So without throwing it in the wheel or securing it somehow, there's just no way you're gonna be able to do it by holding it. So make sure you secure the hub so you can torque these correctly. And then of course you can see all the other steps that were involved. These are 25 foot-pounds. These are 44 foot-pounds. Did it in 2 stages, 25 and then 44. So now that it's all put together, it's time to pack a bearing, slide it in here. Thankfully, the races are already pressed in, both for the big bearing and the small bearing, as you can see right there. So really, we just gotta pack some bearings, throw them in, put our seal around the edge here, and slide it on. Now, securing this guy to the spindle is the same SOP for any kind of disc brakes. So I basically tighten this castle nut with the washer behind it. The book calls for 90 inch-pounds, which is like 7 foot-pounds. It's really low, the torque rating. For me, that's too low for a torque wrench. I usually just get it tight and then make sure I can still spin this. But I don't want it to be free-flowing. I need the bearing to be snug, so I need some drag. If I could get half a rotation, I'm good. So that's what I did, as you can see here. All right, so I've got the caliper out now. I've got the pads, as you can see both of them there. This is pretty intense. I guess in order to install these pads, I got to take out these little snap rings, which can allow me to pull those retaining rods out. And then those retaining rods actually go into these holes here on the pad. So basically, once these pads go in, they're not just sliding out. So here it is, complete. I've got the entire thing put together. I do have the other rotor to put on the other side. I'm working on trying to get some fitment issues here, but as you can see, this looks pretty nice.
Now, I didn't talk about the steering linkage, as I don't even have a steering column at the moment, but I really hope you liked this video and you found it useful. If you did, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We've got a lot more work to do in this car, and it's going to be a fun journey to Project Cars at the Strip in March.